and welcome to my channel. My name is Lynn and today I'm going to be using the We Are Memory Keepers Pocket Punch Board to create a custom envelope, which I'm going to use as a sort of a lucky money envelope for Lunar New Year. So it's perfectly sized to fit bills. And one of the reasons why I wanted to create one this specific size is because I actually went to the bank to withdraw some cash for my nieces and nephews for their lucky money, and $2 bills are supposed to be lucky. So I got a few, and this is like perfectly straight brand new $2 bill, so I can't bring myself to fold it. So instead of folding it and putting it into the card envelope that I made for each of the kiddos, I'll create custom lucky money envelopes, which you can buy, and you can even buy, you know, in these larger sizes that will fit the full bill without folding. But instead of buying it, why not make one, right? So that's what I'll be doing today. Okay, so when I first did my tutorial on how to create custom size envelopes, I did leave myself a little cheat sheet, so thank you past self for doing this. And I have this little handy dandy guide for how to figure out how to cut your sheet down, what settings to use on your punch board in order to create the size envelope that you want. And if you want to take a screenshot of this, feel free to do that so that you can maybe make yourself a copy. But basically what it comes down to is that for your flaps, and I'll link to the video that I posted earlier on how to create custom pockets, but I'll just recap everything quickly here. So for your flap, there are 3 settings that you can put this little guide peg into. You have 1, 2, and 3, and they correlate to the height of the flap. So it's 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch, or 1 inch. So just depending on what your personal preference is for the size envelope that you're creating, you can choose the appropriate size flap. So here's my sample one, and I went with 3/4 of an inch for the top and bottom flap. So I'm gonna be choosing peg location number 2 for this rail here, this dimension on top here. Then for the side folds, there are peg locations that are labeled A through F, and they essentially give you these correlating widths in terms of the actual size or the width of the fold, and that would be sort of these flaps right here. And they run from 1 1/8 all the way to 2 3/8. So there is a limit in terms of how wide of a pocket you can create, because your 2 side folds have to overlap each other in order for you to be able to create a seal there. So you can't make too wide of a pocket envelope or an envelope. And then to determine what size paper you need to cut initially, this is sort of the math of it. So you have the height of your envelope, and you want to add 2 times the height of the flap that you've chosen. So here's my little sticky note cheat sheet if you want to create this exact same envelope. So here's the height of that I want. The bill itself, I measured at 6 1/8 high by 2 5/8 wide. And so for the envelope, I want it to be 6.5 inches high by 3 inches wide, so that the bill will comfortably kind of slide in there. And so to determine the height of the piece of cardstock that I need to cut to create my envelope, my formula is the height plus 2 times the flap. And I've mentioned that the flap I want to use is 3/4 of an inch, so that's 6.5 inches high for the height of my envelope, plus 2 times 3/4 of an inch, and that actually comes out to 8 inches high. For the width of my envelope, the formula is 2 times the width of the final size of the envelope that we want, plus half an inch. And that's because we need for there to be a little bit of an overlap between our flaps. So, moving down, for the width of my envelope, I want it to be 3 inches wide. So if we plug that into my formula, that's going to be 3 inches wide times 2 plus a half. So I'm going to be cutting my paper to 6.5 inches wide by 8 inches high. Then for the side fold, my formula is the width of my final envelope size divided by 2 plus 1/4 of an inch. So if I do that math, the width of my envelope is 3 divided by 2 is going to give me 1.5 plus 1/4 of an inch will give me 1 3/4 of an inch. So I need flaps that are 1 3/4 of an inch. So you take that dimension and you want to look up on this scale here. What letter setting will give you 1 3/4 of an inch? As you can see, none of these line up to 1 3/4 of an inch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use, for one side of my envelope, I'm going to use the C setting, because that is 1/8 of an inch less than what I need. Then on the other side, I'm going to use the D setting, which is 1/8 of an inch more than what I need. So essentially, I need 1 3/4 of an inch on both sides of the flap if we want it to be the same. But since I don't have that option, I am just going to move 1/8 of an inch from one side onto the other. And it's such a small amount that it shouldn't be a problem at all. And the 2 side flaps will still overlap just fine. So in the end, my settings are going to be C2 and D2. So let's start making this. I'll leave this here so that I remember what I'm doing. So first step is I'm going to cut down my paper to 6.5 inches wide by 8 inches high. So I have a full sheet of paper here, and I wish I had thinner paper, but I have a lot of this red paper. I bought it as a ream because red paper I use a lot for during the Christmas time, for New Year's, Valentine's. It's really versatile, so I have a lot of it. But this is 80-pound paper, which is thicker than it needs to be. But that's okay. It's better to have something feel a little bit more substantial than less. But you could definitely do this with thinner paper. Okay, so I've cut this to 6.5 by 8. Now I'm gonna bring it to my punch board here, and on the pocket punch board there are 2 guide rails for scoring. You just want to extend these so that you can score them as far out as you need. There is a scoring tool as well, so I'll slip that out because we'll need that. And what I'm going to do is start with my top edge. So as you can see in the sample one that I created, this envelope is going to be taller than it is wider. So my flaps are on that edge there. So that's the edge that I want to keep at the top railing here. So I want to make sure that I'm always orienting my paper this way. Okay, so the settings we want are C2 and D2. And so if you look at these pegs, there's an arrow that is actually, it's actually etched, into the plastic here. You want that arrow to always be facing towards your paper, towards your project. So we want 2 in terms of the top flap, so I'm going to slot that into 2. The arrow is pointing down, so it's going to be pointing towards where my paper is. And let's start with C. So I'm going to take this peg, I'm going to find the C. My arrow is pointing to the right. It's pointing to where my paper is going to be. So that it does make a difference, because if you can see here, this is flat right here. So if you're butting up against here, that's going to give you a true measurement, versus if you flipped it to the other side, it's not the same. So you want the arrow towards your project. So that's pointing right, that's pointing down. Make sure your paper is nice and flush against both of these rails. You can bring this arm down, hold it. This is a cutter, so on one side there's a plastic sort of nub which will fall into this track here, and then on the other side there's a blade that can cut in both, moving in both directions. And I like to alternate so that you kind of evenly wear down your blade. So just glide this along that track and it'll cut out a nice smooth curve there. I like to leave this paper in here because then I know it's exactly matching that curve, and I'll go ahead and score along the top and along the left side. And what's cool about this punch board is there's actually a dash line extending above here and to the left here, so that even though your paper is actually covering the score track, you can actually see where to start your scoring, because they've extended that score track up there. Now this score track extender is pretty far, but I can't actually, I know it's off camera so you can't see it, but I can't actually score all the way to the end of my paper. It's fine, as long as it's mostly there. We'll catch it when we go on the other side. Okay, so the important thing here is, because we're using two different settings on our side fold, you want to go ahead and flip your paper so that I'm just going to flip it this way. So that I'm basically, if this was going to be the top of my envelope, I'm going to flip it so that the bottom of my envelope is up here, but that same flap that we already kind of notched out this corner, this same side, it's staying on this side, because we want to actually notch out the same width of a side fold, but just on the opposite end, or the bottom end. So I'll do the same thing where I just want to make sure that my paper is flush against the top, flush against the left. I'm going to bring my cutting guide down, hold that down, and then I'm just going to cut from the opposite direction just to get even wear and tear on that cutting blade. I'm going to lift that up, and then again just score along the top and the left. And here you should basically be able to meet up with your previous score line. So that's why, even if you weren't able to score all the way down to the paper, that's okay, because you can finish that score line there. Okay, so that's one side fold that's been cut and scored. So now we need to move our guide here, because I'm using C2 on one side, but then I need to use D2 on this side here. So I'll go ahead and move this to the D location. I'm gonna still keep my orientation the same as it was before. So if this is the top and this is the bottom, I want to keep those ends up against this top peg here. And on the side that we haven't notched out a corner, I'll go ahead and slide my paper so it's flush against the top, flush against the left. Bring my cutting guide down, and I'll go ahead and cut off this corner. And again, score across the top, across the left, or down the left. Then I'm gonna flip this. So basically there's only one corner left that hasn't been notched out, but we're gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna flip it this way. like you're flipping pancakes. And then just kind of butt these up against the rails again. Bring down the cutting guide and go ahead and notch that out. And I'm going to score this on the top and the side. So that's all of the scoring complete and all of the cutting complete. So we can actually set this aside. And this is sort of an optional step. If you're using thinner paper, it may not matter as much, so you could probably skip it. But this is 80-pound paper, and as you noticed, we did some of our scoring on one side, and then we flipped our paper and did some more scoring. But I want to score this in such a way that when I fold it, all the folds are going in the proper direction. That's going to keep the paper nice and strong. So all I'm going to do is just bring my envelope here, and I'm going to line up the score lines that I've already put in. I'm just going to reinforce those score lines by lining them up with any score track here. Or you could use your cutting track if you want to do that. And then I'm going to score everything again. And this also helps because this is 80-pound paper, so it also just gives it a crisper, deeper score line. And I'm scoring all 4 lines on the same side because all of these need to be mountain folds. And so that's going to help me get a nice crisp fold, and it's going to keep the paper nice and strong. And so I'm just going to take that score line and just make sure that it lines up in one of my score tracks. And there you can see nice deeper score lines. Okay, so now we can, basically we're done. We can fold these in and give them a nice burnish. And so as you can see here, we have the 2 side flaps. One flap is actually wider than the other, so you can choose. So if I overlap them like this, it looks a little bit more off center where that seam is. So I like to put the shorter flap on top because that actually looks like it's a little bit closer to the middle of the envelope. So I think that gives it slightly nicer finish. And I'm just gonna use some double-sided adhesive tape because I don't need for this envelope to last forever. And I just need it to last long enough for them to get their money. Because I'm sure it's just gonna go into the bin right after. Although when I was growing up, I saved mine, but I do not anticipate them reusing this or anything, so I don't think that it needs to be super strong. Double-sided dry adhesive is going to be plenty strong. I like to, so you have the option. You can either at the bottom put tuck your bottom flap in and then put the side flaps over, and then you would put adhesive down here also. But for some reason, I kind of like the look of the bottom flap being on the outside, so that's how I'll be adhering it. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull off that. Whatever adhesive you use, just give it a nice burnish to make sure it's nice and makes good contact with the paper. And then that's pretty much our money envelope complete. So there you can see, you can fit a bill, it goes all the way down, and you could maybe put like a little sticker or something to seal that off. So since these are going to be for Lunar New Year or Chinese New Year, what I'm going to do is actually dress them up a little bit, make them a little bit more festive. There are 2 stamp sets that I've purchased for Lunar Lunar New Year projects, whether it's cards or these lucky money envelopes. So this first one's from Apple Blossom. I have the full set that has all 12 of the Chinese zodiac characters. I think Mama Elephant does a set of zodiac characters as well. I don't have those though. I have this one, which is called Lion Dance, and I have the coordinating dies that go with it. And that's one of the common things that you'll see is a lion dance when you go to Lunar New Year festivals. And so I'll use the tiger because 2022 is the year of the tiger, and I might use a couple of the different lions for the envelope too. I don't want all of the envelopes to look exactly the same, so I don't really mind that I'm not really trying to create a design for them to all be replicated. I actually kind of like for each of my nieces and nephews to kind of get something a little bit different, so I'm gonna keep this really simple though. Even though I'm not batch making per se, I do want it to be quick. So what I'm gonna do is just heat emboss this in gold. And I'll bring out my stamping block, my clear Versamark ink, and then I'm gonna try out two different gold embossing powders. I've got this one in from Sizzix, and then the one that I use all the time is my Wow, which I actually have two. I'm gonna actually experiment with. There's the Wow Gold Rich Pale, but then I also have, I think, the what's it called? The Gold Pearl. So let's try all three since I have to make a couple. And I've actually never stamped with these before, but to be honest, I know they're good quality stamps, but also if it's not a perfect impression, I'm not that worried. But I will brush on some. I just use baby powder, but whatever anti-static you've got, you can use that. It just helps to prevent the embossing powder from clinging where you don't want it. And go ahead and stamp out this first one. Try to give it nice even pressure. Since I'm not using a stamp positioning tool, I won't be able to do this a second time. And let's try the Gold Pearl. I'm gonna get some powder on this first before I stamp out the next one. You have quite a bit of open time with the Versamark, which is why that makes for the perfect medium for embossing. But I'll go ahead and dump this excess off. So pretty good impression. First time ever stamped with that. I'll leave that there. And then we'll get the second one. Just putting it on the other side of my block. Make sure this is well inked. And I'll go ahead and okay. I'll just use this. It'd be interesting to compare the different golds that I have. There you go. Not a perfect impression. Probably not the best idea to put it on the opposite side of my stamping block since I wasn't able to press very hard. But I'll go ahead and heat set that. super cute. So I'm definitely going to grab myself another block so that I can stamp these out separately. But I love that. It worked out great. Really adorable. And so let's try the tiger out. And then I'm gonna orient this one this way. And I need actually the block. Okay, so let's grab that. Get a little bit of anti-static powder. This design looks like it's more solid, so this might be more interesting because I'm gonna get more gold. And this time let me try the Sizzix. See how that looks. Okay. Use firm pressure. And looks dark. Okay. Before I dump that, let me put this back where you can see how little powder you actually use. Most of it's going right back into the container. So let me knock this off. Oh yeah, see. Yeah, I didn't do a great job there, but again, I'm not super worried about that. So let me go ahead and heat set this. Ooh, that's really nice. So if I were doing these, I would kind of get embossing powder on all of them and then try to heat set all of them at the same time. That way I'm not turning my heat gun on and off, because you want to try to keep your gun nice and hot and toasty. But that's how those two golds compare. A little bit hard to really compare considering this is such a fine line and that's much thicker, but that should give you a little bit of an idea for where these are headed. So I have 7 more of these to make. So that's my project for today. Hopefully you enjoyed seeing how to make a custom lucky money envelope. And until next time, happy crafting and have a fantastic day. Bye!